No one really expected this, especially weeks after the NHL trade deadline, but we're now having reports that the Islanders and the Edmonton Oilers were actually close on a trade sending JG Pageau to the Edmonton Oilers. And on this episode of Islanders Digest, we're going to really break that down, whether or not this made sense for both teams and what this means for the future of JG Pageau as a New York Islander. Because just because he wasn't traded at this deadline, the fact that his name has been thrown around for the past few seasons does make it more likely that this is a player that is going to get traded this offseason, especially after Lou Lamoriello promise changes. We're going to get to all that in this episode of Islanders Digest, but before we break it down, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Be one of our first 100 subscribers. If you're an Islander fan and you want more Islanders content just like this is the channel for you. Be sure to subscribe. Let's get right into the rumors here. This is from RG Media, and the report is that sources have indicated that the Oilers wanted two-way centerman Jean-Gabriel Pageau, and the Islanders nixed a potential trade deal with Edmonton, and it's after this trade deal fell through that Edmonton did pivot to Trent Frederic from the Bruins. They ended up giving up a second-round pick for Trent Frederic, and this is really interesting, especially because I did find it a little peculiar that the Edmonton Oilers traded for Frederic. Frederic is a player who's injured, has still yet to return from injury to play his first game for the Oilers. This is a player, they gave up a second-round pick for this player, so they gave him a lot. And I really do think there was something between the Edmonton Oilers. This is just a rumor. We can't confirm this, but I definitely think there was something between the Islanders and the Edmonton Oilers. We had made a previous video earlier before the trade deadline talking about how the Edmonton Oilers and some other teams in the West were linked to JG Pageau. However, I think it makes sense that the Islanders did not make this trade. That being said, I definitely think JG Pageau is a player that might get moved in the future, and we could potentially look at Edmonton as a target who may be interested in him next season. One of the big reasons why I was talking about it being unlikely for JG Pageau to get moved, and if you look at the posts from RG Media, they basically say one of the big no-go factors for the Islanders is the Islanders did not want to retain salary on JG Pageau, nor should they. Pageau is a quality player. He plays quality minutes. If a team is not willing to pay full price for him, then it's really not that detrimental, especially this season, having another year under contract for the Islanders to hold on to him for another season, because you really don't want to be eating that cap, especially when that's money the Islanders could be using to spend on free agency. Because if you move a player like JG Pageau, as we're going to talk about in a little bit, you're going to have to replace him. And another thing that I definitely think was a fall through, and this article does talk about, is JG Pageau was really demanding a second-round pick on the market. Maybe the Islanders want a little more than that. But what this is really talking about is how the Islanders really did not value a pick. They wanted a player. And from Edmonton's perspective, I definitely think they maybe consider, and they don't have the best prospect pool. That's the cost of winning recently. They did just draft late in the first round last year, trading away their pick this season to draft in this year's draft. And that being said, they do have a few prospects, and I think maybe Edmonton would have been better off trading off a prospect. And if they did trade a quality prospect the New York Islanders way, I do think they consider eating a little money on JG Pageau. But for a pick, it definitely does not make sense for the Islanders to trade JG Pageau. That being said, it could be a little different this offseason. We're going to talk about that right now. This trade obviously did not go through, but the fact that JG Pageau has been talked about a lot in this trade deadline, he was talked about a lot in the offseason. Now he's having a bit of a better season. I definitely think this is a player that might get moved this offseason. Take a quick look at his stats right here. JG Pageau is having a better year for the Islanders this season. He has 37 points so far. He's been asked to really step up and play some more important minutes, and he's been doing just that. Last year, it seemed like they were trying to consider trading him in the beginning of the offseason. Really did not get a lot of interest, and I think a big part of that was he was not completely healthy, not playing the way he can. Now this season he has 37 points, 12 goals. He's a plus 10, which is huge considering the type of quality minutes he plays, playing against some of the other team's top players. He's big on faceoffs, all things that I think the Edmonton Oilers could definitely use. And I definitely think if I was the Edmonton Oilers, and granted maybe they just could not make it work with the salary, but it probably would have been in the Edmonton Oilers' best interest to try a third team to facilitate a trade to really get JG Pageau for $2.5 million, because with Trent Frederic, you're really not getting a lot of what JG Pageau provides. Granted, Frederic is younger, but this is the type of player, JG Pageau is the type of player who helps you win playoff games. And if the Islanders were in a different situation where they were a little bit younger, then I would argue it makes no sense to move on for this player. But considering where the Islanders are, I definitely can see them moving this player this offseason. And part of that is definitely going to be finding a replacement. And that being said, I do think it makes sense they held on to him this year. Because as we know now, in hindsight, after all this went through, the Islanders ended up trading Brock Nelson. And right now, if you're looking at this lineup, and the Islanders end up trading both of their centers, which I never truly believe was an option. But if they do that, we're looking at a top 4 centers that includes Bo Horvat, followed by Casey Ziquez as your second line center, Kyle McLean on your third line center, and God knows who as your fourth line center. Maybe you move somebody like Engvall to play center on the fourth line, but we're looking at a real rough lineup right now. And I think it's a big reason why the Islanders also were not persuaded to move JG Pageau the time they did. Sure, they probably could have gotten a second-round pick from the Oilers. Honestly, they probably could have gotten a little bit more, especially since a player like Trent Frederick, who does not have the resume that JG Pageau did command a second-round pick. That being said, what would the Islanders have left on this line? Because this is a team, as we know now, Lou Lamoriello believes could still push to the playoffs, and we were calling him crazy at the time, but here we look right now, and we are right in this conversation. And I don't think we're in this conversation if we have Casey Ziquez playing second line center. I think JG Pageau, while he is not a second line center, which is another big reason why I think he will be traded in the offseason, you need JG Pageau right now to make this push, and this push is definitely makeable. Montreal losing a huge game last night to Philadelphia, currently tied 1-1 against the Carolina Hurricanes. Hopefully I don't jinx that. Hopefully we get a big win for the Hurricanes there, and the Islanders can have a chance to make the playoffs, or at least get back into the playoff race in their next game against the Tampa Bay Lightning tomorrow. But just to show, this is another reason why the Islanders did not feel forced to make this move. This is a team that still believed they had some talent and they could make a push. And sure, a lot of fans argue that maybe a player like Kyle Palmieri should have been traded for a second rounder. Lou Lamoriello really was not valuing picks, and that's a big reason why this trade ended up falling through. The Islanders wanted a prospect. And you know what? You can see why Lou Lamoriello wanted players, because this team is still competing. They can still play. And that being said, if we look at this forward lineup this year, this can definitely change next season. As we know, the big acquisition in the Brock Nelson trade was Callum Ritchie. Callum Ritchie is likely going to make the Islanders next season, and he is likely going to start playing at third line center. You don't start him off as second line center, but you're going to want him starting off at third line center. And this is the big issue for Pageau's future on the Islanders. Sure, right now, Pageau is playing second line center behind Bo Horvat. We all know JG Pageau is not really a second-line center. Sure, he's doing a huge service to the Islanders right now, stepping up, and that's a big reason why I think the Islanders can get a better return for him in the offseason, especially after the cap goes up and more teams can bid on him. Right now, for this season, there were not that many teams who wanted centers who could also afford to hold JG Pageau at $5 million this season and next season. We get to next year, now we get to the draft, there are going to be a lot of teams that miss out on this weaker free agent class, and as a result, they're going to be more willing to pay for a center. And they're not going to need the Islanders to eat salary. But just thinking about next year, at least for why I think another reason it makes sense for the Islanders to trade this player, aside from his age, although he's not too old, 32, turning 33, definitely on the older side, especially with Lou Lamoriello talking about wanting to get younger. But I'm looking at that again, and with Callum Ritchie playing third line center, I really don't see JG Pageau as playing a second line center role. And he's not the type of player you want to move to the wing. Talking about his face-offs, talking about his defensive game, this is a player who really does excel at center. And because of that, I definitely see the Islanders moving him out to clear up some cap space. That's going to be a big part of this trade, but also get some good assets for JG Pageau. Because as Lou Lamoriello said after the deadline, there were some players on the roster that he felt like could get more value at a later time, and I definitely think JG Pageau is one of those players, one of the key players he was kind of referring to without really saying it in that interview. Another player, just to quickly note, that I think could be moved from this forward group next season. I definitely see Anders Lee also being one of those players, though I can only see the Islanders moving Anders Lee if they find a quality replacement. Don't think it's going to happen. That's another thing that I can see happening, especially if JG Pageau goes and they are really committed to getting younger. Other than that, I do think this forward lineup mainly remains the same, other than maybe a few younger players, such as Ritchie, maybe anyone the Islanders require coming in the lineup. There is a chance that Kyle Palmieri doesn't return. That's one of the main concerns fans had with the Islanders retaining Kyle Palmieri on the deadline. In addition to not trading him, they did not extend him. I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. Again, looking at where the Islanders are right now, as pissed as people were when we first talked about this in the deadline, Now we look, the Islanders are now 1 point out of the playoffs. You are not there if you don't have a player like JG Pageau and a player like Kyle Palmieri. And honestly, I would say going on a run like this is worth the additional second round pick you might have gotten if you traded one of those players. Realistically, that second round pick did not hold that much value, especially considering the Islanders already have their second round pick this year, and they have 3 first round picks in the next 2 years. I think a lot of fans are still in that mode where we just don't have any draft picks like we've had in the previous few seasons. In the current state of the Islanders, that is not the case. The Islanders are actually starting to build a pretty solid prospect board. I'm not going to talk about it too much right now, but I really see the Islanders being top 15 in the next prospect ranking. That's how much they've come up, especially with acquiring players like Callum Ritchie. That being said, let me know what you think. Do you think the Islanders should have traded JG Pageau to the Edmonton Oilers, retaining half salary and probably gaining a second round pick, maybe a little bit more as bonus? Or would you rather than hold on to him to try to go on this playoff run like they did and potentially trade him for more value down the road and not retain salary? I'd love to know your thoughts about this in the comments below. As always, if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and let's go Islanders and Carolina Hurricanes. Hopefully pull out a big win so the Islanders can move back into the playoffs for the first time since November next game. Let's go Islanders.